All right, SNAP IPO is a thing, and we keep hearing more and more about what a public SNAP will be. Joining us once again is Kurt Wagner from Rico to talk all about it. How's it going, Kurt?
Hey, Jason, what's up?
Not a whole lot. Let's take a step back first and foremost. Last week we talked about it, of course, on the show. SNAP filed its S1. We finally got a good look at what's going on behind the scenes. What stood out for you with that initial filing?
I think the thing that was most surprising, and it probably comes from my time covering Twitter too, is the growth stuff. So what we saw from SNAP was that over, I believe it was Q3 and Q4, the growth that they saw or were seeing in the beginning half of 2016 kind of started to slow down. And it was right around the same time it coincides with when kind of Facebook and Instagram were just ripping off all of Snapchat's features and totally cloning them into their own products. And I think there's, again, having seen what Twitter goes through with its growth issues and how serious that can be for the company's stock and its long-term health, I think that to me stood out as something that a lot of us probably didn't expect, right? I mean, SNAP has been so highly touted, and everyone was excited to see the IPO documents. Everyone's excited to see it go on the market. I don't think that people thought like, hey, there could be an actual user growth issue here, and that's kind of what we saw.
SNAP a little late to filing this? I mean, we've been talking about in recent months about kind of the Snapification of Instagram, and Instagram's actually done really well in that transition. Do you think that's a factor here?
I think Instagram definitely has something to do with it. It's tough to say, hey, you're too late. They've come in, they've already copied all your stuff because Snap's business wasn't there, right? I mean, you go public when your business is ready and when you feel that you can actually return money to shareholders. And, even Snap's business is really young. I think they brought in just over $400 million last year. They'll probably do around $1 billion in revenue this year. So not insignificant, but also, Facebook, I think, did $27 billion last year. So much, much smaller than, where they ultimately want to be. And you just can't go public until your business is ready. So it's tough to say, hey, they should have done it earlier. I think the challenge will be, can they continue to innovate, right? Can they continue that for the last 3 years? They've done stuff that Facebook can't even do. They've been coming out with new products all the time, and Facebook's only solution is to copy what they're doing. So can they keep doing that? If they can, I think they're going to be fine. That's just a really hard thing to do, as we've seen with other companies. It's not easy to come up with super innovative stuff all the time.
So Jason and I, when we talked about this, we kind of went back and forth about the fact that they called themselves a camera company, and he thought that was weird. And I thought it made sense to me in the sense of how I've seen teenagers really use it. Just it's as a camera, everything happens. They don't even use the regular camera anymore. Everything happens through the lens of Snapchat in their day. Why do you think they call themselves a camera company?
Well, they've always kind of pointed out that the app opens up directly to the camera. It's the first thing you see. It prompts you to take a video or take a photo and share it with people. It's funny. They define themselves as a camera company. I think a lot of people would define them as a messaging company. I kind of think of them as a media company because of all the Discover stuff they're doing, and where I kind of believe that they see their future as being a place to kind of host original and mobile only content for a lot of those publishers. So I can see, I think like part of the reason is probably that they want to avoid being a social media company, which is what Facebook is. And so they're saying, hey, look, we're different. We're a camera company. We're not a social media company. I get that. I think that, these labels, and we're all guilty, myself included, of kind of bucketing people into certain categories. I think really Snap could be any of the three I just mentioned. I think they're choosing to be a camera company because it's different, right? With the exception of GoPro, it's not like you're seeing a lot of up and coming camera companies. So it just has this different feel to it, and I think they like that.
How much of that is based around kind of their hardware ambitions then, do you think? Because when I think of a camera company, I automatically, my brain is forced to think about hardware. Obviously, Snap has spectacles, but that's such a low, I mean, that's so low on any sort of material impact with the company. I mean, but is this a big indicator of kind of their direction for the future once they do the IPO?
I think in some ways, yes. I think you're spot on in that spectacles, and they even said this in the S1, they said this is not material to our business. Right. I don't think they expect it to be material anytime soon, or maybe even ever. Spectacles may always just be like a cool thing that they tried, and that created a lot of stir and momentum for them leading up to the IPO. Maybe that was the purpose of spectacles, and it'll just only ever be that. I think when they say, hey, we're a camera company, we know that they kind of took a look at Lily Robotics, I believe, the drone company that was kind of like a selfie drone that ended up shutting down. But the fact that Snap even looked at them as a possible acquisition kind of tells you that they're looking for other hardware projects and other ways to create cameras and create unique ways that you can take video and selfies and photos and all that stuff. So I do think there's something to be said about, the camera company label and building the spectacles. I don't think they are going to be a hardware company at heart. I think that might, be something that they tinker with on the side. I, of course, could be wrong. I also thought they should have sold to Facebook for $3 billion 4 years ago. So you never know. But they're certainly coming into the IPO with advertising being the front and center around their business model.
So they revealed that they revised the S1 yesterday. This is a two-part question. Is that normal? And what did they resolve and why? So that's the three-part question.
Sure. It is normal. A lot of times companies will go through multiple iterations publicly. I mean, they've gone through, I don't know how many, but I imagine dozens of iterations before we ever even saw the version that we saw last week. They just, did it in private. Now that it's out there, they're still tinkering with the document, formalizing and finalizing the language. So it's not uncommon. What we learned, really the big thing that jumped out to me was that they have a $1 billion commitment to Amazon to use its cloud services business. And that was a big deal because they had already committed, and we already knew that they had committed $2 billion to Google over the next 5 years for their cloud services too. So now they have $3 billion basically committed and tied up to simply, infrastructure costs. And some people could say, hey, this is good news because they're expecting their back end costs to go up. That means they expect to have more users and more photos and all more content that they need to host, and therefore they need more space. That's one positive way to look at it. The negative way to look at it is, hey, here's a company that's already losing, $500 million last year, and they have $3 billion committed over the next 5 years. That's not great. It's just hard. Supporting all of this video stuff in particular is it's expensive and it's hard. So they're teaming up with an Amazon and Google. I mean, two of the biggest companies in the world, and I'm sure that they'll be fine. But it's just a lot of money, especially for a company just about the IPO.
Yeah, being beholden to them right out of the gate, that's a pretty significant. Is there any indication that Snap will kind of aim to have its own solution for infrastructure above and beyond that?
They mentioned that was a possibility. Obviously, because these commitments go through, I believe, 2021. It's not as if they could just back off of the Google deal tomorrow, right? This is something that they're going to be in for a while. I would imagine that at some point, they would love to do all their own stuff. Like that's what Facebook does, for example. Facebook has a lot of its own data centers, and they're spending a ton of money to build more data centers moving forward. So it's not cheap. They clearly don't have the revenue in their bank account, the money in the bank account right now to do it on their own, which is why they're paying others to do it for them. But I'm sure if all goes well, if the business goes really well, I'm sure in the long run it's more cost effective and just better for privacy and better for control to obviously do this on your own. So they mentioned they might do that. It's probably a ways away though.
Do you worry that they are too US-centric? I mean, most of their users are within the US, and does the fact that they're using Google Web Services mean that they are not going to be likely allowed in China anytime soon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no one's really allowed in China, so that's not really something that I'd be concerned about for them. I think the US-centric thing is really interesting, right? Because the vast majority of their revenue is coming from US and Canada, North America, and it's nowhere near like when you look at the metric average revenue per user, right? That a lot of these ad-driven companies use. Facebook's is much higher in North America than Snapchat's, which makes a lot of sense. But I think if you were to talk to Snapchat, they'd say, hey, we want to get there someday. That's 10x business growth right there, just here in the US with our current user base. I think the challenge is going to be that at some point you would think, okay, they cap their user base in the US, they cap their user base in Europe, and all of a sudden, they're forced, if they want to keep growing, to move to these other parts of the world, right? To Southeast Asia or to India or to South America. And right now, I don't think that they're capable of doing that. I don't think that they have the structure. I don't think that the app is kind of nimble enough to operate in places where there's only 2G network connections, right? And I think the challenge is Facebook is trying to beat them to all of those places. So Facebook's going to say, hey, in 5 years, when you're ready to go into Brazil, guess what? We already have a Snapchat clone in Brazil, or we already have a Snapchat clone in India. And so again, this is a further down the line problem, but I think it's a serious thing to think about when you look at their long-term growth. And right now they're clearly focused on markets where they can actually make money. And I think that's smart. But, if all goes well, again, they're going to reach a ceiling at some point. They're going to have to move on. And I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens for them then.
And there was one other part that you mentioned in your piece about updated salary information for one of their board members. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's Joanna Coles. She's one of their, she's not a non-employee, non-investor board member, so an outside board member. She's the only female on the board. And there were some stories last week that in the original version of the S1, it had her 1-year contract from 2016 that she had actually signed at the very end of 2015. And the numbers in terms of compensation, mostly, restricted stock that she was getting was significantly lower than all of the other board members who were male board members. So, there was this, of course, obvious, hey, the only female board member on Snap's board is being paid significantly less than all of these male board members. What we found out, I guess, early this morning was that she has since signed a new contract. So she had been on a 1-year deal that just expired at the end of last year, signed a new 3-year deal, I believe in January, and her compensation is comparable with a lot of the other board members. And what I'm told happened was basically when she signed her deal in late 2015, the company was at a very different place. Most of the other board members didn't come on until late last year when it was very clear they were going to be a publicly traded company. So they got deals that were much more lucrative, equivalent to being on a public company board. Now that she's re-signed her offer, she's kind of on the same page with everyone else. And I think people will probably feel better about that because it definitely didn't look great to have your only female board member making significantly less than everybody else.
Yeah, no kidding.